All right, we are back. What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Your guy Cody here, and guys, we are officially 1 week away from the start of the regular season for the Indianapolis Colts. And with that being said, I did this video last year, wanted to do it again this year before the season did approach and we were officially in game week. Wanted to bring you guys one final video before we are in game week mode. So, with that being said, this video I want to talk about today, if you've seen the title, we're talking about some of the most intriguing players for the Indianapolis Colts. You know, going back to last year's video, these were a couple of the stipulations that I had on this, kind of to define a little bit of what does intriguing mean, right? And to me, this is what intriguing means. It means this player has to have some sort of physical talent, some sort of physical ability, right? There's a reason why we are very intrigued with them. They are physically gifted in certain ways and enough to keep our intrigue, especially mine. And I think the second thing is just potentially like a lack of exposure or just a lack of time on the Indianapolis Colts, right? So this could mean a player who this is their first year with Indianapolis, or maybe they didn't play a lot in the years past, or whatever the case is. Maybe they were injured last year, right? There's a lot of different reasonings behind that. But those are some of the stipulations I had for some of the players who I believe for the Indianapolis Colts are the most intriguing. As I did last year, I have 5 players on offense and 5 players on defense. So obviously we have 10 players in total we're going to talk about today. I did want to shout out, have a couple honorable mentions on this list. One guy, definitely a guy that's been lighting it up in the preseason, Adetomiwa Adebaware. I'm really interested to see. I think he does kind of factor into that backup 3 tech. Had a really strong camp, really strong preseason. I could probably throw Isaiah Land in there as well. But those 2 young defensive linemen who really had strong preseasons, now they're not going to probably start, but they might get some decent playing time depending how it looks. I think obviously Adetomiwa will get more out of the 2, but that was one I was really intrigued with. And then I think Tyquan Lewis as well on that defensive line. I mean, I'm really intrigued about every single player on this defensive line, specifically at the edge position for the Colts. And obviously Adetomiwa at that 3 tech. So we'll see on that. But I just wanted to give those guys kind of some honorable mentions there for the Indianapolis Colts. But let's start with the offense, guys, and kind of work our way to the defense. So the first guy I have, and I think this guy's going to be on the list for the next couple of years probably, is quarterback Anthony Richardson. I mean, no doubt, Anthony Richardson, a player that has intrigue written all over him. I mean, we all obviously know the physical talent, when the Colts took him last year in the 4th overall pick. We know that he's got some athletic ability that we really haven't seen from the quarterback position in a long time, or maybe even ever in some cases. But Anthony Richardson, definitely a kid who has a lot going for him. I mean, obviously, he's still far from a finished product. We've talked about it as much. He's still got a long way to go as a quarterback. I mean, there's no doubt. But seriously, it's crazy how much he has grown from year 1 to year 2, despite the fact he didn't play in a majority of last season after going down with that AC joint sprain or whatever it was, where he had to get that off-season surgery. It was this whole thing, right? So, I mean, it's kind of interesting to see how much he's grown already from, preseason, training camp year 1 to year 2. And I'm really just intrigued to see how he grows from year 2 to year 3, and even through the course of year 2 of the regular season. How does Anthony Richardson look from week 1 to week 18? Honestly, that's the biggest things I'm curious about with Anthony Richardson, because it seems like he definitely has it, a really good head on his shoulders, and seems like he's pretty good at kind of moving on to the next play. His mental game is pretty good from what we can tell. So that's definitely, half the battle right there. I mean, he's got the physical tools. So, I mean, all signs are pointing that Anthony Richardson can be a really good quarterback in this league if he can just stay healthy. And that is obviously the biggest factor. But I think if he can, guys, Anthony Richardson's going to be the most intriguing player on this entire list. No question in my mind, just because of the physical tools and the nature of his position. And all eyes are obviously always going to be on the quarterback. So Anthony Richardson, for me, clear cut, the guy, the definition, if you want to talk about intriguing players, it's Anthony Richardson. Of course, we got to talk about the other guy that he's going to be playing with a lot in that backfield, and that is Jonathan Taylor. Now, initially you might be like, Cody, why did you put Jonathan Taylor on this list? Because we already know what Jonathan Taylor is. Yes, I agree with that, but I'm also intrigued because we haven't seen Jonathan Taylor healthy in a Shane Steichen offense. And that is what I'm most intrigued about, and also just the quarterback quality that he's played with as well. I mean, obviously, he's never had a quarterback even close to the athletic ability that Anthony Richardson provides, rushing the football and stuff. So I'm very intrigued by that, just kind of seeing how that looks for the Indianapolis Colts and Jonathan Taylor and kind of him and AR. How unstoppable truly can this duo be? I really do believe they have a lot of potential to do some very, very dangerous things to opposing defenses. So definitely want to talk about Jonathan Taylor just staying healthy, being in Shane Steichen's offense, and playing with Anthony Richardson. I do think there's some special things on the way if he can do that, and if AR can stay healthy as well. So that's why I have Jonathan Taylor on this list. I mean, we would all say he's a top running back in this league, but how much more now with those other factors could it even take Jonathan Taylor's game to another level this year? I'm really intrigued by that. All right, let's continue on looking at this offense. I have 3 more players I want to talk about on the offensive side of the ball. I have 2 wide receivers and 1 offensive lineman. Of course, the number 1 wide receiver you're going to talk about is the Indianapolis Colts second-round pick this year, A.D. Adonai Mitchell. I mean, there's no question. Adonai Mitchell is one of the most intriguing players that you're talking about. I mean, the physical tools are there. Everybody thought he was a first-round talent, but just some potential character concerns, which Chris Ballard's been very vocal about. That was kind of the reason why he fell, but the Indianapolis Colts able to get him in the middle of the second round. And, while he's still a rookie, he's still going to have things he's got to grow in. I mean, A.D. Mitchell so far has made some pretty darn impressive plays for the Indianapolis Colts. Yes, he's had his rookie moments too. I mean, he had a couple in the preseason, but he also had some plays where you're like, wow, this could be very special for this team. So really intrigued with Adonai Mitchell, that connection with Anthony Richardson, and what can he provide as potentially that number 2 outside guy. He's going to be fighting for that pretty much through the course of the season. So I'm just intrigued with the certain packages, with what A.D. Mitchell does well with his, big playability, because obviously we saw he was a touchdown machine last year at Texas. So I'm very intrigued to see how that translates, when the regular season does begin in a week. How does Adonai Mitchell look? How does he factor into this offense? Even if he's not, quote unquote, a starter right away, like I'm really intrigued to see kind of what he, provides right away and how he grows as a player throughout the course of the season, because he is a very extremely talented player. And I just want to see him on the field. I think he has that potential to be a very good wide receiver in this league. And I'm not the only one. A lot of people have said that. And so just really intrigued with Adonai Mitchell, with his game, his physical talents, and what he can do here in year 1 with Anthony Richardson. Of course, I got to talk about the other guy that he's really been competing with for that number 2 outside spot, who I think, and not just what I think, but from what I've heard and what the Colts coaches and GM has said, is like Alec Pierce has had his best training camp to date by far. I mean, this is a kid that I think when we talked about it, it's kind of like his back was sort of against the wall a little bit, right? I mean, everybody was down on Alec Pierce. They're saying, man, the Colts need to upgrade at wide receiver 2. Alec Pierce just isn't getting it done. Heard all those things. The Indianapolis Colts obviously felt like they could get another player, fairly early in the draft. So you look at it, you say, is Alec Pierce, how is he going to factor into this offense, right? Is Adonai Mitchell going to take all his reps from him? How's that going to look? That was some of the questions. And to his credit, Alec Pierce didn't shy away from competition. He didn't shy away from, wanting to really be better as a player. And he didn't shy away from his own weaknesses. He truly understood that he had some glaring weaknesses. He needed to grow as a wide receiver. He needed to increase some certain things where he was very deficient in last year and in his first couple of years in the league. And to give him credit, he put in the work this offseason. And it's very apparent that Alec Pierce has grown as a receiver this year. And I'm really intrigued now because we knew Alec Pierce could run the deep route. Like, there was no doubt he could run the deep route. He could out-jump guys. He could do some of that stuff that he did in Cincinnati. But how is it going to translate in the short to intermediate game for Alec Pierce, right? How is this route running going to look? Because it wasn't really that great the last couple of years. And that was kind of his biggest flaw coming out of Cincinnati, was really like, how much can he become a complete wide receiver? Well, I'm not saying he's going to be like a super complete wide receiver in his NFL career. He's certainly shown strides so far from what we've seen in training camp, preseason, what we've heard from people. He's certainly making progress from where he's been in the past, right? And I think that competition with Adonai Mitchell has honestly brought out the best in Alec Pierce. I really do believe it motivated him to take it another step this offseason and truly improve his craft in some of those areas. So I'm really excited to see Alec Pierce in this offense, man. Like, I know he can do the stuff deep, and they still will obviously use that strength, but like, how else is he going to be utilized this year for the Indianapolis Colts? And can he be a part of helping to take the pressure off of Michael Pittman Jr., who, let's be honest, he was really the only viable option on a consistent basis at the wide receiver room for the Colts last year. So I'm really intrigued to just see Alec Pierce's game, and obviously Anthony Richardson, talking about that. You know, how Anthony Richardson likes to throw the deep ball. Alec Pierce's bread and butter is that deep ball. How does that connection look? Because you talked about it last year. We've talked about it a lot at this point, but like, how many more of those big shots could you have hit potentially last year if Anthony Richardson is in the game compared to Gardner Minshew, right? That's the biggest thing. Because Alec Pierce was open a lot down the field. He just didn't get thrown the ball a lot, and he didn't have as many yards, didn't have as many big plays. But when the Colts did target him down the field, they had some pretty good success doing so. I mean, you think the Tennessee game, you think that Raider game, like Alec Pierce, even that Rams game, you know, when Anthony Richardson was in that game, you know, Alec Pierce has a role in this offense, and he helped you win multiple games last year. So definitely want to talk about that when it comes to the Indianapolis Colts, and Alec Pierce is like, I think he has more that he's going to grow in, and I'm really intrigued to see how he's grown, you know, from 2023 to 2024. All right, the last guy I want to talk about here on the offensive side of things for the Indianapolis Colts is a player who's in a contract year who I think needs to prove a lot to the Indianapolis Colts, and that is Will Fries, the offensive guard. I mean, Will Fries has been the starter for the last couple of years. Last year, I think, was his first full-time role as the starting right guard for the Indianapolis Colts. But look what the Indianapolis Colts did in this offseason. They drafted not one, but two interior offensive linemen. Will Fries is coming up on a contract year. So what I think the Indianapolis Colts need to see from Will Fries is just another step in the right direction, right? You know, Will Fries came in kind of out of necessity in 2022 when everything was falling apart. I thought he was an average to below average guard that year. You know, he wasn't great. He wasn't terrible. He was just okay. And then he comes in last year in 2023. He is the presumed starter. I thought he took his game from being okay, average to below average, to probably above average as a guard last year. You know, it wasn't spectacular, wasn't Pro Bowl, all pro, but I thought he was a solid enough guard where you look at and you say, if that's your biggest weak link at this point on the offensive side of the ball, you feel pretty good about your offensive line, honestly. So for me, I just need to see Will Fries take that next step. He needs to go from just being a good guard to a Pro Bowl level guard. Just something to that capacity. He needs to go from being the, I don't know, this 28th best guard to the 20th or something like that. You know, he needs to take a noticeable step this year where you feel like he needs to be a long-term piece on this offensive line, right? Because let's be honest, guard is super replaceable. I mean, it's not a super valuable position in today's NFL. So, I mean, you can honestly find a guard in a lot of different places. So if you're Will Fries, you need to prove to the Colts that they absolutely cannot afford to let you walk after this season. So Will Fries definitely has a lot to prove here, especially with some of these young guys kind of nipping at his heels right now. Now, obviously, this year I don't think it's going to be an issue, but in the years to come, what's it going to look like for Will Fries? Is this his last year in Indianapolis, or is he going to get an extension? Is he proving his worth with the Colts this year, or even with another team moving forward? So Will Fries, definitely a guy I'm intrigued to see kind of with that, you know, contract extension looming here for him potentially with the Colts. So curious about that. So those are the five guys I have on offense. Let's move it over to the defensive side of things. And I want to stay there because talking about guys in a contract sort of year, I know he's not technically in a contract year, but guys that have a lot to prove about their future with this team, you got to talk about Kwity Paye. I mean, no doubt, Kwity Paye's a guy that definitely, it could go a couple different ways. It could go the one way where he's a long-term piece of this football team. It could go another way where he's not, and he's replaced in a couple of years, right? And there's some younger guys that come up and take his spot. So Kwity Paye definitely has a lot to prove this year. I mean, we know, similar to Alec Pierce, he wasn't a perfect player. You know, he definitely lacked in some key areas that he needed to be better in. For him, it was specifically getting after the quarterback on a good to great level, right? He was not good last year in consistent pressures. He had 8 sacks. You look at that, you say, wow, he had a good season. But you dive a little bit deeper and you're like, yeah, he wasn't very effective at getting after the quarterback, right? He kind of had some of those cleanup sacks. So it looks good on the stat sheet. But when you dive a little deeper, he was not very productive last year or disruptive for this Colts defensive line. And that's why you saw different quarterbacks kind of dicing the Colts up, because they didn't have a guy that could truly do that. Samson Ebukam, as good as he was last year, he wasn't a one, right? Let's just be real. Kwity Paye, there's a reason he got benched for Tyquan Lewis on third downs. Like, he just was not good in any capacity. So, saying that, Kwity Paye has an opportunity this year with Ebukam likely out for the majority, if not all of the season. Kwity Paye has an opportunity here to truly make the Colts believe that he can be a long-term solution, not just as a run stopper, but also as a pass rusher as well. If he can do that, I really do believe he has a future here in Indianapolis for a long time. But it's really going to depend on him. He put in the work in the offseason. He's dropped some pounds. He's gotten quicker, gotten faster, but it needs to translate. He needs to be disruptive. He needs to be disruptive on a consistent basis as well. And he needs to continue to just grow as a pass rusher. If he can do that, take some positive steps this year, maybe improve his total to double digits even and get some more consistent pressures, then you feel a lot better about where Kwity Paye is going. Even if he's like a average type of pass rusher this next year, like, I just think that would be big for Kwity Paye if he can just take that step to being semi-consistent. That would be great for Kwity Paye. All right. Moving on to a guy that I think is the big reason why you feel good about this defensive line, and that's Latu. And this was why the Colts took him, was because of that lack of pressure. Latu coming out of UCLA, one of the most disruptive pass rushers in the draft, probably the most, and probably one of the more disruptive guys we've seen in the last couple of years. So really intrigued by him as well, Latu, because we've already seen in the preseason, Latu's already been given players, not just backups, but like starting caliber, good tackles. He's been giving them fits. So I'm really intrigued with Latu. I honestly think, guys, I could be wrong on this, I think Latu has a great chance to win Defensive Rookie of the Year. Like, I really do believe that. And he better, because, the Colts took him as the first defensive player off the board of the draft. So hopefully he's a guy that can come out right away and he can just be a consistent force out there for the Indianapolis Colts, and they can feel like they truly have found their alpha pass rusher. That's been something they've been missing since Robert Mathis, back in the mid-2010s. Like, it's been that long for the Indianapolis Colts to have, that true number one dominant pass rusher, and they really, really need a guy like that. So hopefully Latu is that guy. Really intrigued about that. He obviously was very productive at UCLA the last couple of years. So I'm hoping that he can be one of those guys that can just right away just make an immediate impact, especially on third down. So really intrigued about him. I have three more guys I want to talk about. Talk about another rookie here. That's Jaylen Carli. I'm intrigued about him because, he was a safety in college. The Colts moved into linebacker. He's got some good size and he's got some good speed and athleticism for a linebacker. He wasn't as great as a safety athleticism-wise, but when you move him down to linebacker, you're like, wow, this kid is very athletic. So he's got a super long wingspan, super fast as a linebacker, and he's got a lot of instincts that make you think he could be a good player. And while I don't necessarily think he's maybe the linebacker 3 right now, I think he certainly has a role, especially on passing downs. I think he could do some really, really good things for this Colts defense and this linebacker room, because we know he's not going to start. He may not even be that third string guy, but I think he has a role this year, and I'm intrigued to see him, potentially play a big role in this defense this year. So definitely want to talk about Jaylen Carli. Then the last two I really want to touch on today, guys, I want to talk about two of these young DBs for the Colts. And I think it was pretty much a given at this point. We were going to talk about some of these young DBs. I could have probably thrown Jalen Jones on here, but I decided to go with two other guys who I think are just a tad more intriguing to me. That is, of course, JuJu Brent and Nick Cross. No doubt, both these guys, it's going to be interesting because I really believe if both of these guys either play well or bad, it's going to really dictate how this defense looks this year, right? Because these two guys are guys that the Colts have put tremendous trust in this offseason. They truly believe these two guys will be part of the solution. And that's a reason why they haven't made a move. Now, was a little bit foolish? Maybe. But that's another debate for another time. But nonetheless, Nick Cross and JuJu Brent, two young guys, they have all the potential in the world. They just need to go out there, stay healthy, number one, Number 2, be consistent. If they can do that, this Colts defense could actually be pretty legit this year. I truly believe that. We know their defensive line has a lot of talent there. Their secondary is a little bit worrisome just because of the youth and the inexperience. But if these guys can play at pretty high levels, I think that'll ease the fear and kind of the anxiety of a lot of fans this year. But it's truly up to them if they do that. So we'll see on that, guys. But, guys, that'll do it for my look at some of the most intriguing players on the Indianapolis Colts heading into the 2024 season. Are there any other players maybe that I didn't mention that you want to talk about as well? Right? I thought of a couple other players I might throw on here, but I decided not to. So if those are some of the players that you guys think deserve to be on this list, or if there's a player like they're not super intriguing, let me know in the comments down below. But guys, be sure to smash that like button, hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell so that you are in the loop when we drop fresh content just like this. Like I said, guys, we are only a week out from the start of the regular season. Colts versus Texans at Lucas Oil Stadium. Let me know if you're going to be there for that game. If not, be sure to check out our live stream that we're going to be doing. We're going to be covering that game. It's going to be great. Hopefully you guys will be a part of that. So that's why you definitely want to hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, all that good stuff. But guys, that'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, guys, go Colts.